In the previous 3 conferences we hosted, we heard that despite the pandemic, there are employment opportunities still available, and we heard from young people who are in paid work even through the lockdown, and what good support looks like to help people secure a job and stay employed. And we know that research has shown us that taking a supported employment approach during a recession supports a whole range of people more effectively. But this morning we're going to hear how some people have explored other options for employment. And I'm going to hand over to Carol now to introduce Keith, who you'll be hearing from this morning.
Thank you. We're delighted to have Keith join us for this session this morning. As we said, he is the star of the show, really, because Keith is somebody who's specialised in enterprise and supported employment for years. I've had the good fortune to know him for many years, and I'm, actually in awe of how much he knows, frankly, and how much work he's managed to do around this subject. And he's got some great stories for you as well. And he's going to take you through step by step the processes that you need to think about if you're thinking that somebody might benefit from being self-employed. So I'm going to hand over to Keith, and he's going to share his slides. That's right, isn't it, Keith?
I think so. Thank you. What a lovely introduction. Hi, my name's Keith Bates. I run an organisation called Mutually Inclusive Partnerships, which brings together a number of different enterprises and initiatives and programs that are all focused on getting more people into work and to try and disrupt this pattern of very poor employment rates that Ellen mentioned earlier. I describe myself as a researcher, developer and practitioner in supported employment, and I work with a number of great colleagues to help more people into work across the supported employment world, which includes supported internships and job coaching, as well as this enterprise stuff that we're going to be touching on today. And that's my real passion. So for many years I've been interested in how we can create alternative pathways to work for people, and have spent a lot of that time developing cooperatives and self-employment opportunities for people, primarily people with learning difficulties, but not exclusively. So I'm a bit of a self-employment geek, I guess, and my current doctoral research is looking at the nature of entrepreneurship for people with learning disabilities. So I'm very interested not only in how we create enterprise, but also in what it does. But I want to start today, if I can work out how the tech works. There we go. So I want to start today with a tale of 2 enterprises that provide an introduction to the 2 key ways of supporting people into work using enterprise as a main route. For those of you who know me and have heard me speak before, you'll know that I use these stories a lot. Make no apology for that, because I think they provide 2 of the best illustrations of what good looks like when we're working with people with learning disabilities, and we're trying to figure out enterprise, social enterprise, self-employment routes for people. And the 2 main starting points are contained within these stories. The first is of a chap called Delroy, who lived in a group home fairly close to me, having spent most of his life either in hospital or care settings. Delroy was considered to challenge services, didn't use speech, and experienced 2-to-1 support, 3-to-1 support for most of his life. He was therefore never considered for employment. And I'm very careful in the way I phrase that, in that I think it was a case of whether people are suitable for employment rather than how we support people into employment in many cases.
Sorry to interrupt you, but people are saying they can't see it as a slideshow.
They
Do you
can't
want
see
to
it.
just try clicking on slideshow again? And
is that okay? Okay, so Delroy, challenging behaviour, doesn't use speech, 2-to-1 support, employment not an option, until his support worker Joe came along, and that's Joe on the right there, who wasn't satisfied with that and thought that Delroy did have a contribution to make. We just needed to figure out how to find out what it was. And so Joe was instrumental in bringing a number of people together to explore these options, and I knew Joe and she knew the work I was doing, so I was part of that team. A review of Delroy's life, very much in terms of vocational profiling and person-centered planning, discovered very quickly that one of the things he really enjoyed to do was crush plastic milk bottles. So he would tidy up in his group home kitchen, and whether he enjoyed the noise or the feeling of crushing plastic bottles, we're not sure, but he did. He also enjoyed being outdoors and was quite a social chap, enjoyed walking around his community, and he loved transport and going places. So it didn't take very long, and very fortunately I happen to have had a background in recycling in my dim and distant past. So it didn't take very long to realise that although the local authority at the time were heavily promoting recycling as a way of diverting waste from the waste stream, they weren't actually collecting plastics. They were doing the tins and the papers, but plastics were not collected. So what we discovered was that around the neighbourhood, people were storing their plastic bottles, waiting for that trip to Tesco's or Sainsbury's to do the municipal recycling bins. But a quick leafleting campaign told us that actually those people would be really happy to pay someone to take those away. That would save them time, it would save them effort, it would save some of the guilt for when they were actually just throwing their milk bottles away. And Delroy was able to be supported to set up a small recycling service. So he charged per bag, had this weekly and fortnightly collection deals with each of his customers, and solved this local headache. And really importantly, the link between Delroy's interests and his skills and the community headache was a really strong one. Delroy was able to benefit from the result and earned not an inconsiderable amount of money. The interesting thing for me was that this was using existing support staff and existing transport. So Delroy was actually just re-engineering the support he already had. But it changed his status. So very subtly, Delroy was now delivering a service rather than receiving a service. His presence in the community was improved, and he interacted with his neighbours. So really important parts of what Ellen was touching upon, the preparing for adulthood pathways in terms of independent living, employment and the like. Delroy's presence was enhanced. Joe then took Delroy, who actually didn't understand money, but we did understand that he enjoyed these trips. So she arranged for Delroy to go on a trip to London and experience the normal tourist stuff, the stuff we've all no doubt done at some point in our lives, the open top bus tour, the trip on the tube, Covent Garden and the like, Trafalgar Square. So Delroy became a tourist in a way that he'd never been before. And this was really interesting in terms of his ability and Joe's ability to support Delroy experience ordinary life things. Moreover, a little while later, he was put in for a recycling award and came runner-up for this excellence in community recycling and waste management. And we see Delroy here receiving his award at another event in London, and I love these two photos because they show the journey that Delroy undertook by setting up a small community recycling system with his existing support, because one person in his life decided that Delroy had options and that we hadn't explored them fully. And I love the fact that the Delroy on the right is not depicted in the same way as the Delroy on the left, and that idea that enterprise is transformatory is a really strong one. The second example is another very old company that I've had the privilege of working with for all these years, 26 years now, which is CleanSweep, which is a contract cleaning company set up as a limited company and is still understood to be the first company in the country to be run entirely by people with learning disabilities. Now, the story of CleanSweep was that 6 or 7 people got together who were all attending the same day centre at the time, and fed up that they were unable to find work elsewhere, came to me as a junior job coach saying, actually, we want to do something about it ourselves. We can't get access to employment in a way that we find tolerable. So what can we do about self-employment? And so we set about working as a group to establish a company. At the time, cleaning wasn't necessarily the activity that they were going to undertake, so they explored a number of different avenues and looked at different options. But eventually it was actually the contact with a local business centre who were renewing their cleaning contract that led the guys to decide actually cleaning is what we're prepared to do. So they were set up all those years ago under cooperative rules as a limited company, and have ever since been trading one way or the other as a very ordinary company. And I remember last year when the year before, actually, when they were coming up to their 25th anniversary, I presented at their celebration and made the point that the day they established themselves was really newsworthy, and it was the mid-90s. Things were very different in those days. And it was a really big story that people with learning disabilities were running a company. But then nothing happened. For 25 years, the story was that they were just an ordinary cleaning company with ordinary contracts, some of which they lost, some of which they gained. They provided employment. People came and went. The original members have since retired, and the company carried on. And it's a really ordinary story of an ordinary company until the 25th anniversary, of course, and then suddenly it's news story again. But I love the fact that Clean Sweep started with a group of people who decided they wanted to do something about stuff, but didn't know quite, and they used enterprise in a way and explored options, and it was their interaction with support and each other that enabled that to happen. And these days they continue, and COVID has been a very difficult time for them, but they continue to meet regularly. They have job coaching support, they have individual support around benefits and working practices and the like, and help with the admin and finances. But in all those years, I think there was only one year where they didn't actually turn a profit. So I really like these stories to open the conversation about enterprise that allows us to think about the two different ways of working. One I describe as self-employed, regardless of whether someone ends up as a limited company or not, which starts with an individual set of skills, interests and aspirations and builds an idea from there. It's the really personalised one. It's the approach that enables people to link enterprise with what they personally want to achieve and using their preferences. The second, the enterprise route, which some may describe as social, others may not, starts with a market opportunity and spots an opportunity or a headache and then develops a business and employs a range of people to work on that. And I see those as the two distinct routes into work for people. But the key message here, excuse me, the key message here is that self-employment is already a reality. All those years ago with Clean Sweep, we weren't sure if it was allowed. We weren't sure if it was possible for people to run their own company, whether the tax law or company law would allow it. We don't have to worry about that anymore. We know that many people across the country use enterprise in one way or another, and today there's a number of examples. There's a few short films we'll be showing to illustrate how certain people have used enterprise in one way to develop their employment. And a bit later on we're going to hear from my colleague Robin, who's going to tell us a bit about his experience and the support he's received. Importantly, though, the line down the middle depicts a differential between how people have been supported. Those on the left have come from supported employment, so people who've come through a supported employment arena, and those on the right have come from other routes, either through community supports or through families or through specific enterprise schemes. And as we come through go through today's conversation, I'm hoping to highlight some of those differences as we go along. So our starting point is that if you haven't got a learning difficulty, 15% might be self-employed. It's a growing trend. Since the downturn of 2008, more and more people have turned to self-employment. Part-time self-employment particularly has been the fastest growing type of employment since then. But it's also an ongoing trend. It pre-existed the downturn of 2008, but it has been a significant proportion of the jobs since then. We also see an increased interest in the way employment is presented. We have the recent news that the Uber drivers are considered employed actually rather than self-employment, but there's focus on good employment and what that looks like and the terms and conditions that people experience with their work. Yet we know, as Ellen pointed out, that fewer than 6% of people with learning disabilities are in paid work. Although self-employment is a really important part of the economy and employment world, it doesn't appear to be so for people with learning disabilities. And I went the other day to update these numbers because you'll see that I'm quoting figures from 2015, and then I didn't bother because actually the numbers have changed so little in the last few years, and I think actually it's 5.6% now. But I thought it almost more telling to leave the figures as they were because very little has changed. In terms of self-employment specifically, fewer than 1% of jobs reported by members of the British Association of Supported Employment and the South West Employment Institute in 2016-17 were described as self-employment. So there's plenty of space for more and more people to consider self-employment if we're assuming that 15% is our benchmark. And probably worth mentioning that we've recently in the last couple of days heard that there's something like 600,000 fewer self-employed people in the country since the pandemic, although indications suggest that that's more to do with the way the government has missed certain groups of self-employed people from their support structures. So the case for self-employment is that it provides additional opportunities to provide work that closely matches the individual preferences and gifts of the job seeker. We would ordinarily say that for all supported employment processes, but it perhaps adds opportunities to explore other types of work that are not found in existing job opportunities. However, it does offer elements of control and self-reliance, which might be appealing to some, and it means that some people can consider the pace and place of their work in order to accommodate personal productivity levels, employment goals and support needs. I'm always a little bit dubious about statements like that because I've been self-employed myself for 20 odd years and I'm not entirely sure I've got more control over everything. I can work longer hours if that's what I want, but it needs to be taken carefully, but it does provide opportunities depending on how you construct and arrange it. There are those who consider self-employment as an untapped source of economic opportunity and the logical next step in the evolution of supported employment. So it is there, and we are working hard to figure out how it fits with and interacts with the other structures, the supported employment structures, the health and social care structures and the educational structures. But it should be and is becoming a much more important element of the employment pathway route. But it's not without its tensions. Tensions that are presented, whether people are motivated by a push or pull drive. Is it something that people are attracted to, or is it something that people end up doing because everything else is difficult? Do we focus our attention on developing enterprise or on developing personal development plans? And is it about profit, or is this about socially orientated ventures? I mean, the key points about this is that although all of us all the time are trying to do both, we're trying to develop enterprise and we're trying to support the development of individuals, there is possibly at some point a place where we have to prioritise one over the other, and some agencies over the last year, in order to keep going, have had to let some people go. In other cases, if the priority is on the individual development, then decisions might be made that are contrary to the best interests of enterprise. So possible funding routes might be required to fill the gap. There's a statement here that the market will not pay a premium for goods just because it benefits a social cause. This is also true. The charity pound is often one that goes first. So what we're trying to do is develop quality products and services that meet a standard and price that customers are willing to pay for in order to try and remain sustainable. So the key points today is firstly that self-employment is already a reality, as I've touched upon already, and I will go through today's presentation with a number of different examples. We don't have to invent it and we don't have to start again. Secondly, normal business rules apply, and we need to use mainstream business planning process even to micro or smaller businesses to make sure basically that they earn more than they spend. We recognise that many of the enterprises can be small, but I think at the cost of some of the people we support, we ignore some of the business processes sometimes. And I'm hoping today to get across that business planning doesn't have to be complicated, but it does have to be done. Thirdly, we need to think beyond skills and how we link skills to opportunities and headaches. In the story of Delroy, the fact that the headache that his customers face with these bags of plastic milk bottles on their doorstep waiting to be taken away were important links that were made to his personal preferences that made the enterprise stand a better chance of succeeding. And lastly, we need to build good practice and sustainable support. The impossible task I'm going to do today, or attempt to do today, is to separate these three main pillars of successful supported self-employment: the enterprise, the entrepreneur, and the support. I actually don't think it's possible, but I've portioned today's presentation into 3 steps, and I intend to offer an overview before showing examples of people who are using self-employment as their route to work. As I mentioned before, I'm delighted that Robin's here, who's going to share some of his experiences of being supported to run a business shortly. So I will also, at the end of each section, offer an opportunity to ask questions and to give myself a breather. But in terms of enterprise. So we know that enterprises are all about using skills and interests to making something that people are prepared to pay for. But it's also about using those ideas and doing something different with them. That might be making something quicker, might be making them cheaper, more appealing or more convenient, using different ingredients or presenting things in a different way. We're trying to make our product or service stand out from the crowd. And each of these changes can have a dramatic effect on what can be charged, who might buy them, and how the products or services might be sold. To illustrate what I mean, I want to talk about bird boxes. So we know what a bird box looks like, don't we? I've got the good fortune to, when we were allowed to travel up and down the country, meeting many enterprise projects, some of which had woodworking shops, and a majority of woodworking shops would have had some experience in developing bird boxes that look something like this. They're fairly straightforward. They're made of wood. They've got sides and a top. There's a hole in the front where the bird can go through, and there's a hole in the back where you put a nail through to nail it to the tree. We also know that working to support people to make bird boxes is a matter of following a straightforward plan. So if we can teach people to saw in a straight line, to drill in the right place, to chop stuff in the right way, and then put it together, pinning and gluing in the right order, we know that we can end up with a bird box that looks something like that. This is the work of supported employment, and we know how to break down tasks. We know how to support people to do this stuff, and therefore we know how to make bird boxes. However, if we started to think differently about using those skills, we can think about doing the same. We can think about making products that look a little bit different. What if we change the shape or the design scheme, or use different color or different materials? We can then make different types of bird boxes. It's still got sides and a top. It's still got a hole in the front and a hole in the back to put the nail in. But it's a very different product. It still uses a scheme. It can still be made by someone who can saw in a straight line, drill in the right place and put stuff together in the right order with pins and nails. So you can see very quickly with this very simple illustration that we can think differently about the products that we're supporting people to make. And that applies equally to services as well. We can broaden out from the first idea and think about the different applications of the skills and interests that people present to us. And I think in this way, we can start thinking about different customers and different prices. So the first bird box, we might think we could sell to a nature reserve. This bird box here is much more of a novelty gift. As soon as we're selling gifts, we're changing the pricing structure. We're changing the relationship between customer and consumer, and we're doing things differently. So I think you take my point that with one set of skills, we can come up with a number of different products that address the needs of a number of different customers. So this idea of thinking in a business way is what ordinary businesses do, and we can do that with the guys we support as well. This is my favourite, probably slightly more elaborate, but essentially follows the same approach. The fact is that normal business rules apply. We know that the three main enterprise considerations are around developing an idea. Where do the ideas come from? How do we check the finances, and how do we see if a business idea is likely to be viable? And linked to that is, are there likely to be enough customers? And we simplify this in our work to think about what can I make or do the numbers add up, and can I sell it? And each one of those throws up a number of questions. Question one is all about business idea generation, and we know that there are a number of fairly standard ways of developing an idea, fairly well documented. You can invent or innovate an idea. There's not many businesses that start completely from scratch. We know the possibilities of invention and competition analysis, replication, and thinking about market making, economic profiling, and they're all legitimate ways of developing a business. However, in reality, the three major business idea generation techniques in our world tend to be the gut feeling, the spotting of an opportunity, either by the individual, by their family member, or by our support workers. The skills audit, which is, if you think about the Delroy story, how that started, we know how to do vocational profiling and person-centered planning, and it's something I'm going to say quite a lot today, is that we know a big chunk of this stuff. We just need to apply what we know in a different way. We can also convert hobbies, and we hear quite a lot of people who have developed a skill or interest through a hobby. But I always warn caution with conversion of hobbies, because hobbies are important, and taking away a hobby means you don't have a hobby anymore, and so we need to think carefully about that. There's also a big difference between doing something a couple of times a week because you enjoy it and doing something every day because it's your job, so we need to be a little bit cautious about that. The second question is whether the numbers add up. It's all about crunching numbers, and in fact lots of people I work with suggest that business planning is all about lists anyway. But in terms of viability, specifically about numbers, understanding the price, cost of sale, the overheads, and mapping these against likely productivity levels and sales potential are important steps. So once we know what the break even looks like, how many sales we need to make in a year to meet the overheads and costs, we need to map that against whether the individual is interested or able to meet those productivity levels. The mainstream business development stuff involved in this is probably overcomplicated, so we've created a number of easier read versions of this, and we hope I'll share some of the resources available later on, but we hope that this makes some of this process a little bit more simple. The third question is about sales, and this is all about ensuring the product or service might sell and generating an understanding of the market and the competition. Not necessarily who's doing like for like stuff, but also thinking about how potential customers might use their money in different ways. In that sense, a cinema is probably in competition with a bowling alley, although clearly both are shut at the moment. But it's not necessarily like for like stuff. It's about knowing the price points and finding routes to market. But we also need to be careful about how we contact market research, of course, because when we ask people, as we've done previously, if they were likely to buy our product or service, should we set up a company, many people are quite keen on giving us positive responses because they want to be nice. So I think we need to be really careful about market research and how we go about asking people. And of course, for many people we support, test trading is one of the most frequently used approaches. Although again, there are plenty of examples where people have test traded by discounting or not charging at all, which tells us little about people's propensity for buying a product or service in real time. Excuse me. So a word about COVID. I can't really do a presentation today, and I don't think any of us can, without the very real disruption that the last year has caused, or the COVID has caused over the last year. Yet despite that disruption, there are many examples of the adaptive power of self-employment. Later, we're going to hear about Robin and the opportunities that COVID has actually presented for him and his business. Blossoms of Grace, which is a florist that I support, has shifted a load of stuff online along with many retailers. She's also changed from real flowers to artificial flowers as a way of adapting her business model. Clean Sweep Guys, if ever there was a time when the status of cleaners has been risen significantly, have changed the way they develop, and the services they're offering to businesses now are somewhat different and more stringent to the ones they were offering, and that includes all the PPE and the like that you can see in the small picture there. They've also realised that there are more opportunities for domestic cleaning than there were previously, because in our own homes, some people are more concerned about keeping clean. And those opportunities are across the board. There's a couple of examples here that I really like. The local bookseller to me, who is unable to sell books in his second-hand bookshop, realised that people on Zoom are now more concerned about what the picture is behind them, that they've been buying books by the yard, able to spruce up their office and make them look more, their spare bedroom rather, and make them look more office-like and them more worldly. And I really love the idea that the opportunities have come out of COVID in that sense. And your On Mute t-shirt sales have raised significantly, I gather, in the last year. So in terms of the business stuff, this is all about testing, refining and testing again. We urge that very simple processes, pretty much one-page A4 processes can test ideas, but it needs to be done. And I think it's one of the things we don't do enough of. And I think we have a kind of well-meaning support worker approach many times, and we hope that a business will work rather than testing whether it works. And I said before, this is really about asking questions. Whether you can or do it, can you already do it, or do you need training? What assets do you have? Do you need support? Can you make or do enough? What's the productivity levels look like? Do the numbers add up? Is that about annual sales, and whether they're achievable? Can the startup costs be met, and what the break-even points are? Are those costs reasonable, or can anything be done to change those? Is there evidence of demand in terms of can we sell enough, and what opportunities does it exploit? We need to understand what the motivation behind customers' purchasing habits are, and who the ideal customer is, the gender, the age, the circumstances. And I think these are really interesting questions. As I said, all the way through, these are mainstream business development questions. Every enterprise will go through a process that looks something like this. And even though small, I think we also need to do the same, because importantly, the testing cycle also provides a map to the business development process and transfers some of the responsibility of that process. as to whether the enterprise will succeed or fail, away from us as support workers, and make the process transparent. I talk to a lot of job coaches who are worried about supporting people to set up their own business because they themselves think they have the responsibility if the business fails. And processes like this allow some of the transference of that responsibility away from us and to work with the job seeker or the entrepreneur and their support. And we'll be touching on different ways of constructing sustainable support a bit later on. That said, thinking about enterprise raises some questions for us to think about. So I'm coming to the end of the first section now. So while Carol sets up the first short film, hopefully she's going to do that, which is about Simon and his work as a gardener. These are some of the questions that I ask myself when I'm thinking about enterprises. There's many reasons why we shouldn't do it. We need to think about, what do we call a success? Are any of these enterprises too small to be considered real, or not last long enough to be considered worthwhile? And the one I get an awful lot of, that they don't really run it, do they? Really glad to touch upon any of those or anything else after this film. Carol, are you there to help out with the Simon's film?
Yeah, I am here. I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm not the most confident.
So I need to stop sharing at this point, don't I?
Yeah.
So that's me done there.
If there are any questions for Keith, if you'd like to put your hand up while Carol sets things up.
Was the one from Julie, but sadly I think Julie's had to go. So.
Oh right, okay. There was a question, Keith, that was.
Julie's here.
Oh, Julie, great. If you'd like to ask your question.
My question was in relation to the cleaning company, and you know they've been in business for 25 years. So my query is around how they get the contracts and how they bid for contracted work. I'm putting together a tender at the moment, not to do anything to do with cleaning, and I'm just glad I'm not somebody who's going to be applying to deliver the service because of the amount of, it is quite difficult. Our voluntary sector find it difficult to put in bids sometimes because of the complexity. So I just wondered how Clean Sweep were getting their contracts.
Mainly through organisations that don't force you to go through Pro Contract or any of these awful platform versions. And for someone who's just spent my last 2 weekends in that world, I feel your pain. They just exclude big chunks of smaller specialist organisations. But so Clean Sweep have had a few local authority contracts over the years, but one of the things they've realised is that they've got an ideal customer as well, and so it's been all about identifying, in their case, small, sometimes voluntary sector, but not exclusively voluntary sector organisations, with an office that comprises 1, 2, 3 rooms. They've had an enormous amount of different contracts over the years, as you can imagine, so they've got a fairly good sense of what their specialism is, and are quite realistic about the types of contracts that they shouldn't be pitching for, and anything with 150-page online platform thing is probably one of them.
Thank you.
Okay, we've also got a question from Cara McKenna.
Yes, it may well be a bit of a daft question, Keith, but when you're looking at, for example, at Delroy, and you're looking at a business being viable, is that viable as his overheads, or does that include covering the cost of the support that he would need to do that?
In Delroy's case, it was very much using his existing support. So it's about reprofiling and re-engineering the stuff he already had in his life. So we face this question a lot, and it's not a daft question at all, because whether or not the support is included in the enterprise is vital, I guess. For Clean Sweep, it's changed over the years. At some points they've paid for bits of their own support, and at other points we've brought in support workers and paid through Access to Work and used some of those regular bits we use. there is a point, and there's also, I'll come on to this later, but there's different types of support as well. So there's the support that we might attach to the individual, as well as the support we think about for businesses and for the sector in which people work. So it varies as well in terms of what exactly is the support and whether the business should really include that. But in Delroy's specific case, he already had a support worker. We just needed to make sure that her role was not to do the business stuff. It wasn't all about running his business for him, but she did facilitate meetings, you know, took a shoebox down to the local tax office at the end of the year. And those guys were really helpful, I have to say. You know, gone are the days where the tax man is scary. And she literally did. I mean, she'd missed it. I was supposed to do it. And actually, the story was that she'd missed and forgotten an appointment with me when I was going to help her do the year end stuff. And she was too embarrassed to phone me up. So that's why she went with a shoebox to the tax office directly. And it's fantastic. You know, it got done. So, you know, there are ways to look at this stuff. And I think one of the bits I come on is the third section where we think about support. That's where we need to be creative and think a little bit differently about not only how we arrange support, but how we define success and viability and things like that. So, you know, we need to make a bit of a shift as well, I think, in some cases.
Thank you.
Thanks. And Zoe, would you like to ask your question? I see your hands up.
Sorry, no, you did just touch on access to work, but I was just wondering how, whether when you're applying for access to work to support a young person, whether they'd need, how many hours they would need to be working. Is it sort of criteria, or how much they need to be earning? I'm not quite sure.
There's you know, it's changed over the years. There's all sorts of different criteria as well, isn't there? There's and not just access to work. So if you're interacting with some of the other benefit welfare routes, there are things like a minimum income floor where after a year there's an expectation through DWP that a business will generate a certain amount of income for someone. I think that's been paused while we're in COVID, actually, but so there's a lot of arguments about whether that's excluding disabled people. The idea that a business will be up and running and everybody's off benefits in 6 months is for some quite unrealistic. So access to work is always a business case based on the individual needs of the person, although they will apply in some cases. And if you've got any experience of access to work, you'll know it sometimes depend on the advisor that you're dealing with. They will apply criteria that aren't necessarily relevant, but they'll ask for things that they think a business should need. You know, I've had examples where people have been asked for very lengthy business plans for 40 quid a week business, those sort of things, because we've got these notions, and it touches on the previous answer. I think some of what we've got to do is shift our thinking about what counts as successful, because many people who are non-disabled don't have a business plan. They probably took their redundancy and they're giving it a go. They've got a shoebox that they give to someone to sort out at the end of the year, and it's all a bit chaotic, yet there's different application of standards seems to be applied if you're dealing with people with learning difficulties. So the answer, I'm afraid, is it varies.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
Okay, Carol, how are you doing? Are there any other questions for Keith while we wait for Carol? Richard, you've put your hand up.
Yeah, I put a message in the text. It's just with regards to someone setting themselves up as self-employed. I work with young people 13 to 25 with education, health and care plans who have got special needs. So I was just asking, because I obviously come to this to broaden my knowledge, would people be able to access Prince's Trust business startup support? Would they draw up a business plan and then go to a bank, or is there any other avenues that a young person could take to get money to set up a business or an enterprise?
Again, the answer to most of these questions, it depends. It depends where you are, and it depends when you are. Yeah, the local Prince's Trust guys are worth contact. I've heard good stories. It depends whether their local circumstances mean that your guys can access them with the appropriate support. Clearly, a lot of stuff's been put online over the last year. I did hear a story of a Princess Trust course where the entrepreneur was given a 140-page document to look through before the course started, and 2 days to read it, which for him wasn't appropriate. You know, in terms of, do you need funding from a bank? It depends on your business, because it depends what the startup capital requirements are. There are lots of different local economic regeneration, business development, local authority offers, depending on certain postcodes, depending on certain socio-economic groups. You know, what used to be European money used to come and go through different parts of the country. So it's always worth contacting the local authority economic guys to see what's available, and having a little sniff round. And there's a lot, and I anticipate there being even more enterprise support structures coming through in the coming days and months, as we kind of climb out of the pandemic.
Thank you, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Richard. So Carol, I think, is going to try and share Simon's story on the film now. Hopefully technology will support that. So here we go.
Cut the lawns, weeding, raking leaves, and just generally tidy people's gardens up.
You've now been self-employed for almost 9 months.
I have.
How's it going?
Yeah, it's going really well.
Good.
Yeah.
I know in the summer you were very, very busy.
Very busy, 7 days a week. Yeah.
How are you doing with your bookkeeping? Are you keeping up to date with that?
Yeah, I'm keeping right up to date.
Yeah. How much have you been helping with the books?
To start with, quite a bit.
Yeah.
But then slowly Simon's taken over and he just does it himself now. So our first move was to get him to learn to drive. When he passed his test, this gave him a whole new scope, and it made us appreciate that he was capable of a lot more than we perhaps gave him credit for. And we felt also that he could be going into work and earning a living rather than just doing charity work. So bit by bit, we got him 1 or 2 little jobs locally. We wanted to expand this, so we contacted
Carol, the sound has stopped for some reason. Are you on mute?
not possible thing for him to do.
Somebody muted me. Can you hear it again?
Yes, we can.
And that road, and it's really paid off.
Simon works for me on a self-employed basis in the garden here at Cranmore. I put him in charge of the lawn. It's not really my favourite area, so he's extremely good at doing that.
Just being outdoors in the fresh air and really enjoyable.
Confidence is the main thing. He is a different person. We never thought that he could go and talk to new clients and express himself enough to get them to appreciate that he would be okay working for them. And he has come on a lot.
I think that was back to you, Keith.
You can all see what a cluttered desktop I've got.
Oh, there we go. Great stuff. Thank you. It's probably worth pointing out, actually, that I'm aware that all the films today feature men. There's plenty of examples where women have set up businesses, but not captured in convenient 5-minute films, I'm afraid. So so there's another couple to come. But right.
Back to technology again, Keith.
Back to technology. It's my favourite.
Well done.
Oh, look at that. We're on a roll now. Okay. The next thing, as I said, you know, really difficult to separate these out because oh, we got special guests, have we?
It's okay, Keith, it's muted now.
It's all about how we identify people who might be interested in self-employment and for whom self-employment might be a suitable route to work, which presents another problem for us. For many non-disabled people, the starting point for self-employment is a salaried position where they get to understand the job and the sector, learn the ropes, develop the network, and at some point take a leap. However, few people with learning difficulties have that employment background, so the starting point becomes one of three main motivations. That their type of work lends itself to self-employment, and there are certain sectors where you're more likely to be self-employed. There are certain jobs where self-employment is the way they're done. Until recently, of course, taxi drivers would be one, but the recent decision about Uber drivers is probably going to change that. But there are others, bricklayers and horse riders and others, you're more likely to be self-employed. The second group is that they don't mind what they do, but have a feeling that they want to be in charge. We don't get many people who just come along saying they want to run something, but Clean Sweep earlier showed a group of people who wanted to run their own thing, and the actual business idea came later. However, of course, the last group, and perhaps the most significant group of people, are the ones who look at self-employment as a choice of last resort, the thing where everything else has failed, so we might as well give it a go. And in fact, the academic literature asks a lot of questions about whether people are attracted to self-employment because of the flexibility and opportunities it provides, or whether it's because of the lack of equality in the mainstream employment market. So these are important questions that we need to consider when we're supporting people, because it also suggests why many of the enterprise examples I'm showing today and I experience anyway, come from a fairly familiar set of sectors. You know, we've got the gardening, we've got the craft, we've got the cleaning, we've got the catering. They're you know, frequent entry-level jobs for people with learning difficulties anyway. And it might be that these business ideas are fairly unsophisticated because people are converting hobbies or day centre activities or community activities rather than going through a salaried position where we learn to understand types of work that the average career advisor won't be talking about. Interesting points in terms of the sophistication of the enterprise. But we know, again, we've got all these people, they've all got skills, they've all got interests, and they've all created something out of those skills and interests that maps to a set of customers and consumers who are paying for what they've built and developed. So there's a fair amount of interest in what makes up an entrepreneur. How do we identify entrepreneurs when they're stood in front of us? And I'm not entirely sure is, I'm afraid, the quick answer to that. We spend a lot of time trying to spot the person who we're going to support into self-employment, either because they're great entrepreneur potential or because they've got a great business potential. And there's been plenty of studies that have tried to isolate the entrepreneurial traits common to all business owners. It seems that only desire for control and a need for achievement are considered the crucial traits of the entrepreneur, but there are many articles written about other characteristics which are helpful, which include being determined and focused, able to spot opportunities, happy to take responsibility and be open to change, good at managing relationships, being motivated and comfortable about taking and managing risks. That's a really important one. There's a lot said about entrepreneurs taking risks, and I don't think they do. I think what entrepreneurs do is they identify risk and they manage them in a sensible way. And there's something about being self-starting, and I think that's an important one as well. We do need people who want to do the stuff that they're being supported to explore. My experience suggests that while few individuals possess all of these, it is possible to offer a more relational take on enterprise that ensures required traits are met collectively by combining the skills of support workers and family members. I think this is one of the cases where I was suggesting that we start to think differently about how we run businesses. And I know I talk a lot, and one of the questions at the end of the last section was whether people really run their own enterprise. And I talk a lot about the fact that I run 4 enterprises, but I certainly don't do it all. I have people in my life who, some paid and some unpaid, to do the stuff that I can't do. I've got people who do stuff that I'm too busy to do, and people to do stuff that I frankly find too boring to do. And I think that's the same. I think we have different people in our lives, and there's a lot of work that's been carried out previously about the difference between our social networks and those of the people we support in terms of how many people are paid and unpaid in our lives. But it's something worth thinking about. So this more distributed relational view of enterprise, as long as we meet these traits, or a good number of them, collectively, then we're on to a winner. It's also worth mentioning that quite a few disabled colleagues have made the point that life as a disabled person itself actually demands the development of similar traits in order to manage their impairment and live successful lives in the community. And they wonder how many have needed the determination to do things that other people have suggested were not possible. And so some people I work with are saying, actually, just being disabled forces us to develop some of these traits. An interesting point, I think. In order to create this, we need to think beyond skills. And this is back to that idea that you can't isolate the entrepreneur from the enterprise. And in our world, you can't isolate the enterprise and the entrepreneur from the support. So Patrick is a young man with a learning disability who was keen to work but unsure of the direction to take. He told his employment support worker that his main interest was interior and exterior house painting. He was also a keen gardener. So having completed an MVQ, he tried some work experiences at his local GP surgery, as well as for some family friends. Although it went well, Patrick found it hard to find a job, and he started to think about doing things differently. And that's when the idea of exploring self-employment emerged. While thinking about what he could do, it became apparent that Patrick lived in an area where lots of retired folk lived. Many of them were living independently, but with support, Patrick wondered if they might be interested in a bit of help around the house. Patrick's personality was perfect. He was a quiet and unassuming man, and just the right person to do a bit of handiwork without taking over the house, as some tradespeople are prone to do. Turned out that the customers were only too pleased to give a bit of direction as well. He therefore set about offering services in his neighbourhood, and although he printed some leaflets, it was very hard to get his personality, one of his unique selling points, across to the potential customers, so they couldn't understand the benefits of hiring him. However, he was nervous about knocking on people's doors. In the end, it was his sister who stepped up and helped Patrick speak to people and develop a small round. One of his greatest assets, his personality, was linked directly to the potential customers and the problems that they could solve for them. So the story of Patrick was one where he started off thinking about one thing, he wasn't able to get a job, perhaps because of that looked at self-employment. But again, this idea of linking his skills and interests to the needs of customers and to make sure that he identified his ideal customer type was important. The journey here was also one of procession, and the first idea didn't work, and yet it was an ongoing exploration about what would suit Patrick most of all. So starting with his interests and skills, of course, the vocational profile led him down one route. However, in the planning for that idea, the realization that his assets met the problems and opportunities, the demographics of his neighbourhood provided the opportunity, and his skill and personality provided the answer to those problems, was really important. So he started off actually doing garden maintenance until the winter came, and of course there's a problem with some gardens, as you can't get work all the way round, and so introduced the idea of painting and decorating in that way. To some extent, Patrick was a little bit unusual in that he was a car driver and car owner, so he was able to introduce a mobile element to his business. But it was the development of meeting assets and skills, problems and opportunities that came together to provide his enterprise idea. What's really neat about Patrick's story is that, like many people who lived with their parents, these parents moved, and Patrick moved with them, and he went from one end of the country to another. And what I was really pleased about was that although we'd assumed that as Patrick moved, it meant the business was going to end and that was the end of it, actually we heard a year or so later that he'd managed to re-establish his business in his new locality and was doing much the same work. So actually he'd moved beyond the need for the support that we'd provided. So we were much less important than we like to think we were. Perhaps we got things going, but he was perfectly capable and willing, with that family support, to take on his enterprise and keep going. And it's a really neat way of hearing about enterprise changing individuals as well as individuals changing their enterprise. Before we know quite a lot about this. The good thing, we already have many of the tools and are or should be practicing the use of vocational profiling and employment planning approaches. We've just got to think differently and link these approaches to the enterprises to move forward. Once, of course, we've tested the ideas. There are many resources available, not only through the NDTI and Preparing for Adulthood, but organisations like mine, the Foundation for People with Learning Disabilities. My organisation is Rapid Enterprise Development, and we've developed these resources over time. And it is about, like all things, using the ones that are appropriate for the people we're supporting. Time for my shameless plug. We developed a whole load of development workbooks recently as a result of COVID. And so the Thinking About Self-Employment guides take the entrepreneur and their support workers through a number of steps to enable someone to explore a potential enterprise. These are designed primarily for people with learning disabilities in mind, but we found that in actual fact they present a really good agenda for work with support workers. And so although designed primarily for disabled job seekers, the aim of the guides is to generate the confidence in people interested in exploring enterprise independently or with support. 5 guides in all. The business idea, getting productive, which is where we're trying to think about how an enterprise might meet the employment aims of an individual. Thinking about money and an explanation of what I've described earlier in terms of break even and viability testing. Thinking about customers and consumers, and thinking about support. These coincide with the development of a new Rapid Enterprise Development website. Links to there, that's in development, with a number of other resources that have been created, all freely available and hopefully of use. So the common themes we're starting to see between all the examples are that the skills, interests, aspirations of the individual or group meet a community need or demand through the provision of a viable enterprise that uses business processes. However, what varies between the enterprises is the way the support has been structured and the need to sustainably provide support and the journey that the enterprises have taken. Whether they've come through supported employment, education or some other community support structure, including, of course, families, and whether these are dedicated enterprise projects or just part of the wider employability platform. And I mean by that the 2 main courses. I showed earlier on the picture of lots of enterprises with a line down the middle, and some had come through supported employment and others had come through other routes. And the importance of this for me is whether we devise enterprise and self-employment supports as a standalone project. I'm going to touch upon this a little bit later on, but the advantages of standalone projects is that you can have a bit of a wow and you can launch them, and they're probably a bit easier to fund, so you get a 2-year project going. The disadvantage is that you have to have a certain number of people. But most importantly, I think that people need to understand self-employment and what it is before they sign up. Whereas a route through supported employment or the existing arrangements that we have, all an individual needs to do is say, I'd like a job, can you help me? And we can help people figure out the exact arrangements. And given that most non-disabled people don't actually know what the definition of self-employment is, I think it's quite sensible to think about many of the guys not understanding that themselves. So as we watch the next film, these next questions spring to mind. So what processes do we have to identify entrepreneurs? when do we mention self-employment as an option? Mention it too early, and I think families who are already a little bit concerned about a son or daughter going to work, maybe even more so. We've not done a great job at providing sustainable supports for people, and it is families who end up picking up the pieces if we've got that wrong. And I think we spend a lot of time, until the more recent years, we spent a lot of time dropping people off and walking away. So we need to define what exactly our role is, and again I'm going to come on to some of that in the next section when we talk about support. So hopefully we have another couple of short films, and they are very short films that provide illustrations of different things that people are doing. Oh, we're ahead of the game.
As if by magic.
Excellent.
Adam sells animal feed and bedding, and I spoke with one of his customers, Keith Wright of Vale Gardens.
So Keith, you buy Adam's products, don't you?
I do indeed, yes.
How do they go down with your customers?
Oh, we find our customers actually enjoy the size of the packaging he brings in. Most of our products are quite large, but the fact that Adam can break it down into smaller packaging and present it in the way he does, and I think the fact that it says Adam's product on it tends to make it more saleable.
How long have you been doing business with Adam now?
We've been doing business with Adam for approximately 4 years.
So you'll be carrying on doing business
in
the future?
The good thing with Adam is he's reliable. And as businesses go these days, that's important.
This is a store bale. I take it up a store. I put it on this pile. This is the next step. I sweep it up, put it in a bag. I put it, store in a bag. I put it on a scales. I print labels off.
Okay, and what does it say on the labels?
Adam small animal products.
So Adam, do you bag up any other pet products?
Hi. And then shavings.
Could you show us one of them to see what it looks like? Oh, I see. They're like wood shavings, are they?
Yeah.
Okay, that's sort of bedding, is it?
Yeah, bedding.
Okay. I can see you've got some rabbit hutches behind you. Do you breed rabbits as well?
Yeah.
So you know a lot about what pets need.
We appear to have lost the sound, Carol, for some reason.
It's telling me that the system audio sharing was stopped from an error. I don't know quite what's going on. You can't hear it.
No. It's frustrating.
I've got it on loud. It's something the system's done, unfortunately.
Keith, are you able to perhaps just give us a summary of the end of the film?
I was just wondering whether or not the key message has got across. Actually, it was probably an illustration of someone's business involving family, involving identifying customers down the road, and what he's the big story, I think, is that the guy in the farm shop, the agricultural suppliers, is saying that Adam's product is in small bags, and people really like that. They also like the fact that he's a local supplier, and there is an element of community well-being support for him, but actually his product is of good quality and good price.
Yeah, so meets all the business needs, really.
Yeah.
I'm going to try again with the next one. Is that right, Keith? And you want the next one?
Yeah, I think so. It's only another 3 minutes. So, I mean, the alternative is that I try it.
Do you want to do that? I've got it lined up. Let's see if it works for me.
Okay.
I can't control the system cutting out, unfortunately.
No. I think that's the modern way, isn't it?
Are there any questions while Carol sets this up? Anybody have anything they'd like to comment on, or maybe any thoughts or questions? Okay. There's a lot to take in, Keith.
I mean, can you hear it?
Sorry, Carol, the sound cut out then.
You can't hear me.
I can hear you now, but I can't see anything on the screen, the film or anything.
Okay. Okay, maybe Keith, you have a go. There is a question for you though, so I don't know if you can do both multitasking that way. I'm not sure.
I can't see the chat. Is it in the chat, Carol?
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, so the colleges. It's a question from by Sonia. Saying the colleges I work with offer various routes to employment, but I'm not aware of any courses for self-employment or having the opportunity to run a small enterprise at college or to learn the skills needed for self-employment. Does anyone know of a course for colleges for self-employment? So it's not just for you, Keith.
No. I mean, there are a few. There are enterprise support. There are enterprise development courses, not only run by colleges. Someone touched upon Prince's Trust earlier on. There's a question as to whether or not they're all appropriate to some of the people we support, because I was chatting to a mum fairly recently who's supporting her son to become self-employed, and she was really frustrated that she's got the EHCP, although she's had to fight for that, but there's nothing appropriate for him. There's nothing that actually meets his needs and his interests, and the mainstream business development courses are really quite dull, and they spend too much time training things that are irrelevant to his enterprise. So, you know, one of the reasons we've obviously created Rapid Enterprise Development was to try and provide some resources that were at least more helpful.
I think that really shows you the need for really good person-centred approaches, because when we explore what people want to do and use person-centred conversations, you find out more about them rather than trying to fit someone into something that currently exists. And study programmes have that. You know, it's an option. The study programme can be a bespoke programme of study around that person rather than trying to fit someone into a pre-existing course. So I think that highlights your use of person-centred approaches and vocational profiling.
Yeah.
And can I comment? I would talk to the college about if they've got a programme that's about routes to employment. Self-employment is one of those routes, and so it is about making the programme more bespoke to the individuals. So if you've got an individual interested in self-employment, it is about working with the colleges, and also then the colleges working with that other sort of external support for people who want to develop their entrepreneurial skills, because there are things around to support people.
Yep, there are.
So are your eggs less expensive than the ones you get in the regular shop?
Yeah, we try to get the price as low as we can, and it is lower than the supermarkets, I'm proud to say.
And where do you get them from? Is there a farm that you use the same farm all the time?
Yeah, we use the same farm again for the good source. Good poultry farm near Chorley.
How far away is that?
About 8 miles away.
So, can you tell us a bit about what you get out of running your own business, please?
The pride of having my own job, getting to know my areas a lot more better, making my neighbours my friends, getting the help, bringing a bit of money to help out around the house. And to take part of the community, to take part in all of them.
Joe, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. Look, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
There's your money. You've got a nice day for delivering today.
Yeah, it's really turned out nice again.
Yeah, it has. At least you won't get
enjoy
wet.
my eggs?
Yeah, they're good eggs. They're locally sourced, aren't they?
Yeah, of course they are. Fresh, local, any size you want.
And the right price. That's the main thing.
That's
these
what I'm here
days.
for. Okay, you enjoy them. Okay,
have a
nice
nice
week.
day.
See you around.
See you.
Right,
Bye.
I also asked Joe's mother, Sue, what she thought Joe had got from his business.
Key things I would say are confidence, organisational skills, being able to work independently, having a sense of urgency, which he certainly never had before, banking, many skills, many skills.
I'm interested in how much support Joe needed in the beginning and whether he needs less support now.
He definitely needs less support now. And of course, one aim of the business was to create a business that Joe could grow into and run independently.
And you mentioned his confidence. How have you noticed that changing?
Well, when he first started the business, he would say that it was quite a hurdle for him just to go and knock at strangers' doors and ask for the payment for his eggs. And anybody who knows him now would see that he's quite confident to do that on his own, and quite capable to have that conversation, which he wouldn't have been able to do 4 years ago.
Thanks, Keith.
Can we now see my slides again?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, third one. Final piece about support. And the way we enable people to consider the options around small business ownership, to test, plan and establish enterprise and provide sustainable structures that can support beyond the first few months. And I think the difficulty here is within supported employment, we're paid to get someone into work. And whilst we talk a lot about sustainable supports and coming into the workplace if any changes are needed or additional supports required, the funding structures tend to pay us when someone gets a job and possibly 6 months into a job, but not in any sort of long-term way. So I think we need to think about the big consideration is how this all fits with the supported employment infrastructure that we already have. One question to ask early on is whether support for self-employment is to be considered a standalone venture or part of the wider support service, and that's what I touched upon earlier, whether we have a separate product or it's part of the single gateway into work. Assuming that we're using the single gateway and that we work with our job seekers to figure out the best way of support, I'm sharing the supported employment 5-step process. Referral, job profiling, vocational profiling, job search, employer engagement, and then on and off support. And against that, I'm suggesting alternative entrepreneurial routes that you'll see share many of the same steps, and in some cases show them in a different order. This has a lot to do with one of the tensions I mentioned earlier, which is about whether we're supporting the individual or whether supporting the enterprise. And as I said, although we're trying to do both, there's always a point, or always a risk that there's a point where the priority of one will need to take over from the priority of the other. However, I think it's much more messy. I'm much more inclined to think that a more accurate description of what we're trying to do is within job coaching and supported employment is to provide something a bit more chaotic, because actually what we're really offering is an art that tries to capture the essence of the individual and plugs them into an opportunity that's appropriate for them, whether that's employment or self-employment, that's achievable to them and that meets their needs. So actually, if we're supporting someone into a straightforward job, we don't follow a linear pattern, because if we engage with an employer and an opportunity arises, then we might go straight to work. The example of Clean Sweep was that they spend an awful lot of time thinking about what they might want to do and mapping their own skills, interests, as well as possible business opportunities. But it was actually a phone call. It was a business centre that said, we've got a cleaning contract available, would you be interested? That's what made them act. And so it's I think it is the whole educational world is a much more messy than we're led to believe, and I think it's important to remember that these steps don't necessarily come in the right order. The other consideration is about how we train people, because if we support someone to work with an employer, it's the employer that provides the job list, the standards to which they're expected to be undertaken, and the order and speed in which they're performed. It is our job then to learn those, develop an understanding of how non-disabled people would undertake them, and train people to these standards. Our work is complete and the job seeker considered independent once the standards are consistently met. That's the whole process of supported employment. However, it doesn't quite fit with self-employment, and we have to provide and create some of that ourselves. It's typically done using business support networks, which utilise the expertise of families, business mentors, community workers, enterprise agencies, as well as job coaches, of course. And importantly, we need to ensure that there's support for the individual, support for the business, and a general sense, business in a general sense, and support for the specific industry that might be helpful. The first, I think we're really good at. I think we're good at making sure people are doing what they want to do, and we can map skills, interests, we do the vocational profiling, we do the person-centered planning. The second, I think we can generate quite easily if we engage with others, and the question about whether there's any appropriate courses in a college is an interesting one, but that alludes to the idea that colleges that are providing courses for people with learning difficulties or SEND might need to engage more actively with the mainstream business support world. But I think it's important to make sure that the support for the business to act as a business, the tax and the legal stuff, the insurance, the marketing, that sort of stuff, the stuff that every business needs to ensure they've got in place. The last point is really a plea not to forget the importance of expertise appropriate to the sector. If we are supporting someone to set up a gardening business, we really need someone who knows about gardening. And I think we're at risk of using well-meaning support workers who don't have enterprise experience, and that approach might explain why many businesses have failed or find difficulty in providing viability, and so are overly reliant on funding. And it involves this stuff. The enterprise facilitation is about creating the infrastructure, the business planning, ensuring the business is viable, community connecting, and I think job coaches who have, and in supported employment agencies who have a really good, strong address book with links to good employers are a very useful resource in supporting people, not only to run their business, but kind of develop that original business proposition that we talked about before, the sophistication of the idea that many people lack because they didn't go through a salaried position. We can still access employers to help us with that. And then we've got the on and off job coaching work support. Can't really leave today without talking about how important families are. I think in all cases that I'm showing today, and in many others, the role of families is vital. All three films illustrate, when you get to see them at least, illustrate the strong family backing, and even when there is a formal enterprise support structure in place, families play a vital role. And it cannot be underestimated that there are plenty of examples where families have played that role, not only in encouraging and sustaining a business, but also developing it in the first place. And I think one of the early questions we ask potential entrepreneurs when we're thinking about how we identify people for whom self-employed might be suitable is that question about where's the support behind them, whether it's formal support or familiar support. So I'm going to stop there and invite Rob Meader, who's a friend and colleague I've been working with for a number of years, to talk to us about his enterprise. Robin and I have been working together on and off for 7 or 8 years now, I think, and I'm delighted that he's going to be able to tell a little bit about his experience. We recorded his interview last week because we weren't sure how the technology was going to work. Oh, how ironic. However, Rob's here on the call today, so any questions I'm sure he'd be really pleased to answer at the end. So we'll have another go at playing a video, shall we?
Do you want me to try, Keith?
Yeah, please do. You got further than I did last time.
Windows Media, so let's see if it'll work, okay?
First of all, thanks very much for agreeing to speak to us today. We're very keen to hear about what you've got to say about your support. But to begin with, could you say a little bit about who you are and what you do, please?
Right, my name is Robin Meader. I am a self-employed artist. I do drawings for different groups, charities, organisations, and I also like design packaging, animations and materials for various businesses, and I do it as a little work tool as well. This is my PA, Charlotte Woodall, who advises me in my money, my work skills, my contracts, and helps with anything that is difficult in my artist work I do.
So who else do you get support from, Robin?
I get support from Dr. Nicola and Dr. Bob Rose. I also get support from Peter Grice from Photo Symbols. I get support from you as well, Keith, and I get support from my Auntie Gina and Uncle Chris, who are my guardians, my family members.
And we're all known as your support circle, right?
That's right, yeah, you're my circle of support. So like any problems with my skills, my education jobs, or my artist events I can go to support. I say, oh, I need to run a business, I need to get some money, I need to help some people out, and to look at the contract. Is it worth paying? Is it worth doing the job for? And you'll decide whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or yeah, I reckon Robin can do it, or well, maybe Robin can't because we need to look at another thing that needs to be sorted out. And then they'll say, yeah, you can do that job, Robin, and we'll set up you a date, a time, and the materials you might need as well.
Brilliant. Could you say a little bit about what we bring, because each of us come from a different background, don't we, on your support circle? Could you say a little bit about what each one of us does?
Right, well, Nicola's my treasurer. Well, Nicola's my treasurer who teaches me all the education finance jobs. Bob's like university boss who says to me where I can do this job properly or how this job could be run. Charlotte's my PA, who's also my tutorial boss, and she goes along what I can do and what I can't do. Peter Grice is my Photo Symbols boss. He looks at the logos and the designs that I can use for my artist skills. Keith, you're my self-employed boss. If there's any jobs I need to do or how I can get the money for the job and the materials, I can look at whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And Uncle Chris and Auntie Gina are my guardians about my work and benefits issues. If I get stuck on any jobs and I'm really stuck on doing something, I can go to my Uncle Chris and Auntie Gina. So I've got a job to do. Is it whether I can do the job and not get affected with any money I'm getting? And they'll say, yes, it's a good thing, or they might say it might be a bit effective, it might be a bad thing.
Great stuff. And why do you think it's important, Robin, that you have such a wide group of skills on your support circle?
Because it helps me to juggle my balls carefully, to feel like being a juggler. If you can juggle like 3 balls, you can keep the job going. If you juggle more than 5 or 6, I probably all fall over the place, and then you got to like pick them up as one at a time and decide which is the best one to keep for the job and which one isn't the best one to keep for the job, because people might say you've done too many jobs, and we might have to like look into some issues or cut something off. And then I get contracts with people that say that's a good thing I can sign to this job petition, and it will be like the circle might say, yes, you can do this job, or well, I think you can look at it a bit longer, and if you think the job's a good thing, we'll just look at it on your tablet, we'll just sign a few contracts with the business, and they might say, yes, I think, Robin, you can definitely go to that job, and you can just like do whatever artist work you need to do to help that job out, or that company or organisation. You might get a few ideas about what you might come up with, whether you can say, yes, I can do that job and it's a good idea and I'm really pleased with the work I'm doing to help these people out. And the circle of support might say to me, oh, that's a brilliant job you're doing there, Robin, and they'll give me more and more and more jobs. And what I don't want to do, I don't want my head to feel like a brick, because if it feels like a lump of bricks and there's too many jobs, it's like being on overload. It's like, oh no, I got too many jobs on my mind and now I just can't get one out of my head. And the job circle has to be there to make sure that my head's not overloaded with jobs or ideas or equipment. And it's a bit like the time I'm going to get from the jobs, the dates I'm going to get from the jobs. Might be like creating breaks and art materials. Drawing and writing in the job might be important, because there might be some ideas you might like to jot down on a piece of paper and share back to the feedback team. If they say that's a good idea, yeah, you can do that. If we get stuck into any financial businesses, it's the person I don't really mention that much. Her name is Emma. She might say to Charlotte, I think Robin could have the money spent on that job, and yes, he can do it. But then Nicola and Bob might say, I don't think he might, because we might go through him a bit longer. And there's a little circle that says what different parts of the pie I'm going to use to get these jobs to go, whether it's like education, funding, work, materials, equipment, where I stay to, like my accommodation and my transport. And it might also be like, how long is the journey going to take? It might be like I have to fly out the country, or I might like stay in the country and get a car or a bus to get to that place, or a train. And also, how many hours am I going to do in this job? I'm going to do like 12 or 13, or probably like 7 or 8, and it depends like how long the meeting's going to last, how long the job's going to last, how long are the contracts going to last. And it might be like, it's a good thing, like yes, or probably no, I think let's go a bit longer with that bit.
And what's been difficult about working with a circle of support?
Is where everybody comes up with a good idea, and then you come out to a really tight situation where I've just been thrown into the deep end, like, oh, I got a higher up ladder for you now, Rob, and you might just climb it, get as many jobs done, and then they set you up with another higher up ladder, and you feel like, well, wait a minute, what about my job at the supermarket, or my job with OST? Am I going to keep that ladder going up higher? Or am I going to climb down a few steps and talk about each one of them at a time before I can aim for that goal?
Yeah, but overall, it's a good thing. So what difference does it make? How do you feel about having a support circle?
I feel really proud with the circle support, because they give me all these good ideas, all these good jobs, all these good contracts, commitments, and I feel like, yeah, I can do it. And I feel like instead of like 50%, I now feel like 100%, and it like keeps people really going into the job. And now I'm running a little organisation to help other people into doing self-employed artwork. So the business will carry on a bit further with myself as well.
Brilliant. And is it fair to say that it's taken time for that to the circle to grow and for us all to get used to working together?
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it takes a really long time. Yeah, it takes about 5 or 6, probably 7 or 8 people. We might get visitors who might come along to circle support. Say I'm Matthew from the NHS, or I'm Lisa from the university, and could we come along to your circle of support as guests and decide what we can get you to do, like for a conference or for a workshop? And I might say, yeah, we can have visitors to come along and see how I do with the circle of support, and they might sign a petition or a contract. I'd go back to Charlotte and say about the money side. And then we just go through along it with there, and the circle becomes more and more bigger, and it becomes more and more of a big support scheme that helps me to say, yes, I can definitely do that job, and I can definitely help other people out, as long as I got my circle of support there to say to me that I can go forward, and yes, that job's definitely worth doing.
Thank you. That's really helpful, but I know a lot of people would be thinking about what impact COVID has had on the way you work and how you've been supported. To finish, could you say a little bit about how that's worked out?
Well, since we've had this lockdown, I just sat in a world on my own the other day watching all these COVID videos on YouTube. I felt like, well, I could do that. I could definitely make a COVID video to keep people safe in the community. And I did. I approached Howard and Charlotte and my Thursday group workshop, and they said to me, you could definitely do a video on COVID, and we did. We did our lockdown stories, and at the end of every single interview we had like me talking 1 minute, then there was Clemmer, then there was Katie, and everybody was talking away about their conversation to do with the COVID. And once we recorded it, we then made a little video, and at the end we had a little information pack that said, if you have any problems with COVID-19, phone this number. Howard won an award for it. He won quite a bit out of it, and we were like really pleased.
Excellent. I think you both won an award, didn't you, for it?
We did. We both won an award. I think even the whole group won an award for taking part in the workshop.
Excellent. Thank you. So the very last question, Robin, have you got any advice? What advice would you give to someone who was about to start their own self-employment business about developing support, having a PA and setting up a support circle?
Well, I just been to a person the other day in Frome. I felt like if you want to become a self-employed artist, look at how good your education degree is. If you're pleased, just sign up and say, yes, I do it. And make sure you get a circle of support group that will help you along the way. If you feel you want to go up the ladder, if you ain't got a second job, you can do it. But just look for advice and make sure you don't go overboard like I did, and then become really good to be a part of the artist team. Great. We are going to run a little business shortly to do with the artist team, which is a new charity. It'll be launched shortly by us in April, and it's called Pigeon Productions.
Thank you, Robin. That's fantastic as always. Thanks so much for your advice, and thanks again.
Thank you, Keith. That's been brilliant.
Robin, that's fantastic to hear all that.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any, there's lots of people applauding your work and what you've been doing and the input you've just provided, so thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our session. Keith, is there anything you'd like to summarise with?
No, only to thank everybody, really. I mean, I'm hoping we've conveyed the important role that self-employment can provide, and that link between the business, the enterprise and the support, and how crucial it is.